Cheers. Welcome back to October Stories. This is actually going to be part 2 about wolves. So last time we did the big bad wolf, the legend that goes behind that and where that came from. But this week we're going to focus on werewolves. And I got my wolf ears on, so we're ready. Okay, I'm talking about the timeline of the werewolf legend and where it came from. It kind of came from all over. But the very first instance we can find is my old friend Gilgamesh. So 2700 BC. There's actually a passage in Gilgamesh where he refuses to date, shall we say, a lady because he finds out that she turned her ex-boyfriend into a wolf. So kudos to Gilgamesh for doing his research before he goes out with someone. We think Tinder's bad. This lady actually turned her ex into a wolf. So yeah, way to go, Gilgamesh. The next one we could find, that I could find any evidence of, is Greek mythology, the legend of Lycaon. So Lycaon had 3 sons, and he didn't like Zeus. He just kind of wanted to, kind of be a jerk to Zeus. Not a good idea. So he killed the youngest of his sons and burnt the body and offered it to Zeus as a sacrifice, which I don't know what that proves other than Lycaon's got some issues. But as a punishment, Zeus turned the other 2 sons into wolves. So yeah, not a good idea to, to tick Zeus off back in the day. The next one I can find is a Norse legend, Saga of the Volsungs. And that's in the late 1200s. And that's a saga about men who wore wolf skins and became wolves and became very violent when they had the wolf skins on. There's always this theme, it seems, especially after the 1200s, of the werewolf and becoming that and it being an excuse for bad behavior. Basically, if you're a werewolf, you tear up your village and you kill people and you eat human beings and other horrible things, mostly children too. So yeah, it seems to me like a serial killer excuse back in the day. And we've come to figure out, obviously, that there's several different things that could contribute to someone being thought of as a werewolf, which is obviously lycanthropy, but also hypertrichosis, which is just excessive body hair, excessive to the point where it's not manageable. And that's a thing. And it's just a genetic anomaly. Also, food poisoning. People who got food poisoning were considered to have some of the same symptoms as a werewolf who'd eaten somebody and it didn't agree with them. Obviously, there's other things that we have that come out medically later, mainly the illusion, lycanthropy itself, which is the illusion that you are actually turning into a wolf when you're really not. So continuing that bad behavior stuff, back in France in 1521, in 2 separate villages, there were 3 people. So Pierre Bergot, Michel Verdun, and Gilles Garnier, not the shampoo guy, okay? So these 3 people, so Verdun and Bergot were in the same village. They said they made a pact with the devil to turn them into wolves. And then Pierre Garnier was in a separate village, but they all wreaked havoc and murdered people in their village and were kind of like some serial killers and were considered to be werewolves. So they were all burnt at the stake back in the early 1500s, which is the only way they thought you could kill a werewolf, silver being in short supply. So, and then the bad behavior king, the one that there's movies about, there's a lore episode about this guy, the Bedburg werewolf. So this also was in the 1400s in Germany. Peter Stubbe, this guy slaughtered quite a bit of his village and hid it for like 15 years. Like, people go missing and, oh, but he's a stand-up guy, seems totally normal. That sounds very serial killerish to me, but to them, Peter was a werewolf. So burnt him at the stake too. And then they beheaded him, just, make sure he doesn't come back. you know, I think they beheaded him first and then they burned him. Not sure which happened first. But they like overkill, extra. Don't want this guy ever coming back. Okay. In the Americas, Indigenous Americas, we have obviously the skinwalker and a related legend of the Wendigo. Now, the Wendigo, I've never really considered to be a werewolf, even though it's considered to take on parts of forest animals, wolves, stags, etc. But skinwalkers was actually people who wore the wolf skin and took on their traits. So I asked the question, can werewolves ever be helpful? And I found a couple instances in which they were. So in the indigenous peoples, there's a Blackfoot legend called the Wolf Man. He didn't start out as a wolf man. He was married to two women who were not good people. They wanted to kill him. And he was, by the tribe standards, a decent husband, not a bad guy. They took him out into the middle of the forest and had him chase this stag they said they saw. But they had set up a trap, a pit with a hole, and a buffalo skull on top so he couldn't see the pit. So our gentleman sits on the pit and he falls down through the hole and he's stuck. And they just leave him there. Pretty horrible. I mean, there's a lot of ways to leave your spouse, but that's not a good choice for anybody. So the women pack up and leave. They pack their crap that night. They leave him in the hole. They are like on the outskirts of the tribe village making their own new tent, right? So the animals of the forest get this guy out of the hole. They drag him out. And it doesn't say which animals, but there's no wolf in this part. But they take him, and this is awesome, they take him to an old blind wolf who has medicine. Think about that. An old blind wolf who has medicine. So I just love the way that's put together. There's this animal who's wise, and he's a wolf. Wolves are very pack-oriented. They take care of their families. This guy had been taking care of his family. So the old blind wolf heals him, first of all, from his fall down the pit, and nourishes him, and says, you could do us a favor if you would just go to your village in the middle of the night, take some of the meat that's hanging up and bring it to us. So he agrees. But he goes out that night and he takes some of the meat from the villagers. And when he returns, the old blind wolf is grateful, and they've done this exchange of spirit and goods and materials. But the women are never seen again. By the morning, their tent had vanished and nobody could find them. And since they were not great people to begin with, no one really looked for them. So I love that. It's a Blackfoot legend. I absolutely love it. The other nearest and dearest to my heart werewolf story where werewolves are helpful is a legend from Ireland. It's from the village of Ossory out on the Tipperary, out in the middle of nowhere, very remote areas. A lot of sea around there, not a lot of villagers at the time. And this was mid-13th century, so it was really remote. And this legend actually stretches all the way to Norway and into England, but it's based in Ireland in the village of Ossory. So the Ossory werewolves have actually been talked about even in the Lore podcast and a couple other popular podcasts about werewolves and about lore as usual or things like that. And I want to thank them for bringing it to my attention because I started researching it and I was fascinated. The Ossory werewolves are also mentioned in the teachings of St. Patrick. So get your brain around that one. The story goes, St. Patrick is traveling through Ireland, spreading the word and converting people, doing his job as a future saint, being a holy man. And he comes to this village out in the middle of nowhere. And it's kind of in the mid-afternoon, but it's getting dark. And he's trying to convert this village, and they're just so resistant. They're like, I get you, but it's not our thing. And he gets very persistent, and the villagers say, you need to leave here before sundown. But he decides, I really want these people to come on board. So he stays. As he's standing there, the leader of the tribe, the whole leader of the village, like head honcho, says, "You need to leave now or else." Okay. As he's packing up his stuff, he's taking his time. He thinks, maybe if I just hang out a little more. But no, as he's looking around, the people that were surrounding him and listening to him teach started becoming hairy and grunting and losing their human qualities and taking on a more wolf-like quality. So he's standing there and he looks up and he's surrounded by this half human, half werewolf or half wolf society of people in this village. And the leader actually says, "You're dead. We're going to eat you." But because St. Patrick had been so kind, even though he was there to teach, he'd actually been kind and like done things for people and said nice things. The villagers turned on their leader. So the werewolves turned on their pack leader to spare St. Patrick. So in that case, if you look at the word of a holy man who actually talked about this when he was in Norway, according to documentation, which I don't really have, but it's a story that's persisted. And the Irish werewolf, and especially the ossuary-based, are positive protectors. They're not people who rip people apart unless they're an outsider trying to change the entire, belief of the village, which St. Patrick tried, but they had their thing. But for their families and for others and for the children and for the villagers who were infirm, like the elderly, the strongest in the pack, protected them. So there's two evidence-based of the werewolf being helpful that I could find. Also, I noticed in all this stuff, there's very few female werewolves. Not a lot. I mean, we see one in American Werewolf in Paris. We see, Julie Delpy does her thing where she transforms. But it doesn't seem like a theme anywhere else. Maybe it's because we're expected as women to be, remotely, like pretty much hairless and calm and nice and sweet. But I started really thinking about that protector side of the werewolf. I mean, you don't need a female werewolf to create more werewolves. You just bite somebody and they don't die. Got it. But I wanted to do this poem, and I wrote it when I was 17, so I wrote it a long time ago, but I had this dream that I was a werewolf and I was transforming, but I was also running across these rooftops and there were doves everywhere and they were scattering, and as my feet moved forward, I could see my feet change from human feet to claws and to nails, and I could feel the cold of the pavement and the garments being stripped away as I didn't need them anymore. And it was a very freeing dream I had. And the piece is called Running with Doves. It's been in the Library of Congress since 1987, I think, but it's been republished a couple times. The last time was in 2013 as part of the Fires in Eden anthology. So I'm going to read this to you. And I want you to think about a female werewolf. And as people, how we have to submit to time schedules and how we have to live those societal norms that may not be what our real nature is. We may have a much wilder nature. We may have a nature that thrives on not clocking in or not being on someone else's time schedule or not wearing that dress code that we're forced into. Not being caged. So this is called Running with Doves, and I hope you like it. You get naked, and the game is called skin. You become the animal skin you wear. You run through schedules, unthinking, until you start to sweat under the sick haze of silks and wool. You want to break something. You want to walk into a room of feather pillows with a pocket knife. But the weapon is on the inside. Better chain that beast to the floor, lady. But in the line of cheekbone, the flash of green eye, the stretched muscle of a shorn leg, the irons are loosed, stripped, shaken, broken. And like Michelangelo's creation of Adam, the cat electrifies the canary.